I heard my own son call me a burden before he even realized I was still on the line. That's the sort of truth you don't prepare for at 74. Not because you think you're protected from cruelty, but because you expect at least the decency of a lowered voice. He thought he'd hung up. He thought I'd drifted off into my old woman silence, the kind he's grown so comfortable assuming I live in. But the phone hadn't disconnected. No, it carried every word straight to me, clear as the church bell outside my window. Honestly, she's just a burden, Nathan said, calm, casual, as if discussing a faulty appliance. I sat very still at my kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone stone cold. There was a pause on the line, one I didn't understand at first, and then another voice, a man's. Polite, careful, his boss. "That your mother?" he asked. "Did she hear?" A door shut in the background, the car maybe, and Nathan lowered his voice only slightly. "No, she's fine. She won't know. She never knows. It's exhausting. Always needing something. Always calling." I closed my eyes. I hadn't called him in 3 days. The floor under my feet felt unsteady, though nothing in my little house had moved. I could hear the shift in Nathan's breath when he finally noticed the faint crackle on the line. "Mom, you still there?" I don't know what hurt more, what he said, or how quickly he tried to reel it back. "Mom, I didn't mean, the connection must have—" "I heard you," I said quietly. Just those 3 words. Even then, I didn't raise my voice. Even then, I felt the old habit of softening myself so he wouldn't feel cornered. But something inside me had already started to slide into place, like a door being pushed shut after too many years left open. "Mom, it came out wrong," he said. "You know how stressed I am. My boss is here, we're driving to the site. I didn't mean it like that." But he did. People don't invent new truths under pressure. They let the hidden ones slip. "I see," I murmured, though I didn't, not fully. Not yet. My hands felt oddly steady. "Drive safely, Nathan." "Mom, wait." But I'd already ended the call. For a long while I stayed right there at the table, the winter sun dragging its pale light across the linoleum floor. When you're my age, pain doesn't leap. It seeps, like water through old wood. His words settled slowly, filling every quiet corner of me until I could barely breathe. A burden. That was the word he chose. As if all the years of raising him alone after his father died, the night shifts, the 2 bus rides to the library job, the evenings spent helping him with homework while my hands still smelled of dust and old paper, had somehow rearranged themselves into weight pressing down on him. Maybe I should have cried. A younger version of me might have. But at 74, tears feel like something you save for the doctor's office or for funerals, not for truths you've already suspected in your bones. I stood up slowly, joints protesting the way they do on damp days. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses back when you try to breathe through it. I walked to the living room window, the one that faced the maple tree my husband planted the year Nathan was born. A thin crust of frost still clung to the branches. I thought about calling him back. Not to scold. No, I've never been good at that. But to ask why. Why he felt this way. Why he said it. Why he never seemed to see me unless he needed something signed or something paid. But then I imagined the call. His sigh, the practiced explanations, the gentle insistence that I misunderstood. I've lived long enough to recognize when someone is preparing a story for me, one where I'm expected to play the forgiving mother with the tired smile. No, not this time. Instead, I turned off the kettle, poured the cold tea down the sink, and stood in my empty kitchen until the clock struck the hour. A burden. The word echoed once more, then settled somewhere deep, not like a wound, but like a decision. The house felt too small for the weight of that phone call, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I didn't cry that morning. Grief at my age doesn't spill over. It settles, like a thin layer of dust no one bothers to wipe off anymore. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching the backs of chairs, the edge of the bookshelf, the worn arm of the sofa, as if these ordinary things could tell me whether I had truly heard my son say those words, or only imagined them. But memory, even an old one, does not lie. His voice echoed clearly. Burden. I carried the word with me into the bedroom where sunlight lay in a narrow ribbon across the quilt I'd had for 40 years. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the closet door, remembering when it used to hide gifts for Nathan's birthdays. The baseball glove he wanted so badly at 10. The suit for his first internship interview. The second-hand guitar I worked 2 extra shifts to afford. I remembered the way he used to thank me then. Sincere, unguarded. The kind of gratitude that wasn't shaped by obligation or shame. That boy is gone, I thought, and I'm not sure when he disappeared. People assume that relationships crack loudly, but more often, they dissolve quietly, like sugar in warm water. One day, you look at what's left and realize there's nothing solid to hold on to. I had felt this thinning for years. The shorter phone calls, the rushed holidays, the way he always seemed to stand half-turned toward the door, already thinking of where he had to be next. But even then, there was a line he hadn't crossed. Yesterday, he crossed it. I walked into the living room and sat down in my husband's old armchair, the one he used to read the paper in before the illness carried him away. Sometimes I still imagine him there, clearing his throat, adjusting his glasses, glancing up at me with that patient, steady look of his. "What would you say now, Walter?" I whispered to the empty chair. Walter had always seen the truth long before I was willing to face it. He used to tell me, gently, the way only he could, that Nathan had begun to pull away, that he was growing too comfortable taking and rarely giving. But back then, I defended our son the way mothers do, out of instinct rather than reason. He's busy, I would say. He's young. He'll come around. But youth becomes middle age, and busyness becomes an excuse sharpened into habit. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. The memory of that morning replayed in slow motion. The cold tea, the cracked voice, the steady tone of a man who didn't think his words mattered because the person they were about was too old to count. I don't know how long I sat like that, motionless, listening to the tick of the old clock. But eventually, my breathing steadied, and something subtle in my chest shifted. Not healing, not yet, but awareness. A clarity so simple it felt almost embarrassing to name it. I cannot unknow what I heard. When I stood up again, I felt taller, though my spine has curved with age. I walked to the kitchen, not because I needed anything, but because the room had always been the center of my life. The place where I cooked meals my boys loved, where I stitched Halloween costumes, where bills were paid and scraped knees tended. I opened the cabinet and took down a mug. The chipped blue one Walter bought me at a street fair our last summer together. I boiled water, made fresh tea, and sat down at the same table where the word had struck me that morning. For the first time, I let myself ask the questions I'd been avoiding for years. When did my son stop hearing my voice as something worth listening to? When did my presence become an inconvenience to be managed? When did love turn into something assumed rather than felt? I wish I could tell you I found answers, but all I found was the quiet truth that grief and dignity can sit side by side if you let them. My phone buzzed twice on the table. Nathan again. I didn't pick up. I watched the screen dim, the room returning to stillness, and I realized that for most of my life I'd rushed to soften every conflict, to smooth every ruffled edge, to be the one who swallowed hurt to keep the peace. It was a habit carved so deeply into me that breaking it felt like prying open locked fingers. I set the phone aside. Outside the window, a gust of wind shook loose a few brittle leaves, sending them spinning down the street. The maple Walter planted had weathered decades of storms, roots deep enough to survive whatever came its way. I touched the table, the wood warm beneath my palms, and understood something quietly, painfully, unmistakably true. My son may have stopped seeing me, but I had not stopped being someone worth seeing. By evening, the house felt heavier than it had in years, as if silence itself had gained weight and settled into every corner. I moved from room to room without purpose, touching things that suddenly felt like artifacts from a life I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. A half-folded blanket on the couch, a stack of mail I hadn't opened, Walter's old fountain pen resting on the side table. He used to say it made him feel important, even though he only ever used it to sign birthday cards. I stopped in the hallway, looking at the framed photographs lining the walls. Nathan, at 5 years old with chocolate smeared across his cheek. Nathan at 12, missing a front tooth and grinning as if the world belonged to him. Nathan at 18, taller than me, awkward in his graduation gown, but proud. So proud. And me, standing beside him in every picture, smiling with the kind of hope only a mother can carry. When did he stop standing close to me? I couldn't pinpoint it. Perhaps closeness fades the way sunsets do. You don't see the moment light becomes darkness, only the aftermath. My knees ached, so I lowered myself into the armchair opposite the window. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on, one by one, soft halos of yellow light settling over the quiet neighborhood. Families were beginning their evening routines. The Johnson boys riding their bikes in circles, the Tanners dragging their trash cans to the curb, the Petersons' dog barking at absolutely nothing. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that my world had tilted that morning. It struck me then how long my life had revolved around being needed, first by Walter, then by Nathan. And when Walter passed, I clung to Nathan as if helping him was proof that I still had a purpose. Every ride to the airport, every last-minute loan, every casserole, every birthday spent waiting for a call that came late or not at all. I held on to those moments as if they meant he still saw me. I didn't realize until today how deeply I'd mistaken dependence for love. The phone buzzed again on the coffee table. I let it ring. A voicemail followed, then another buzz. A text. I didn't reach for it. I didn't want to hear his voice bending itself into apologies shaped for convenience rather than remorse. Instead, I pushed myself out of the chair and went to the kitchen. I needed motion, something to anchor me. I filled the kettle, lit the stove, and found myself staring at the flame as it curled around the metal base. Heat spread slowly. It takes its time. Grief does too. I thought of the conversation I'd had with Nathan last month. He needed help with a down payment for something. A new townhouse, he said, closer to work. He'd been so certain I would say yes, so matter-of-fact in the way he'd asked. No embarrassment, no hesitation, as if generosity were my obligation. I gave him part of what he wanted, not all. And even that felt like too much now. He never even thanked me properly. He just said, "You're a lifesaver, Mom," the same way someone says, "Pass the salt." The kettle whistled, pulling me from the memory. I poured the water but didn't drink. The steam rose and faded, leaving nothing behind. A sudden chill ran through me. Not from the cold, but from the realization that my home, for the first time, didn't feel like safety. It felt like the waiting room of someone else's life. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself and walked toward the back door. The evening air was sharp, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves. The maple tree rustled softly, the branches brushing against each other like an old couple whispering in the dark. Leaning against the porch railing, I looked up at the sky. It was turning the color of fading bruise, purple, gray, a hint of blue refusing to surrender. I'd always found comfort in twilight, the way it blurred the edges of the world. Tonight, it only made me feel more visible in my aloneness. But standing there, something else stirred. Something small, but steady. Not anger, not defiance. More like a shift in balance, the first tremor before a long overdue realignment. I whispered into the night, "I'm tired of shrinking." The words surprised me. They weren't rehearsed. They weren't bitter. They were true in a way that felt almost physical. I'd been folding myself smaller for years to make room for other people's comfort. Nathan's moods, his schedules, his pride. I straightened my shoulders. A simple motion, but one that felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd misplaced. When I went back inside, the house didn't feel heavier anymore. It felt expectant, as if it knew something I hadn't yet admitted. I looked at my phone then, not to listen, not to reply, just to see it lying there, powerless without my attention. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for letting him wait. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, before the sun had fully risen. Dawn crept in shyly, a thin gray light settling over the kitchen table. I sat there with a fresh cup of tea, hands wrapped around the warm ceramic as if it were the only thing keeping me steady. The night had not brought rest. My sleep came in short, shallow bursts, each one interrupted by the memory of Nathan's voice spilling carelessly from the car speaker. A burden. The word clung to me like a cobweb I couldn't brush off. I reached for my planner, a habit from the decades I spent working at the library, where order meant survival. I flipped through the pages, scanning the notes I'd written over the past months. Small reminders. Refill prescription. Call insurance. Prune the rose bushes. Bake cookies for the church raffle. But as I looked at the careful handwriting, a strange thought took shape. Quiet, but insistent. My life had been arranged around everyone but me. Bills taped inside the cover. Lists of things Nathan asked for. Loan dates. Payment deadlines. A reminder about the car insurance he'd forgotten to renew. Every page was a breadcrumb trail of the ways I had kept his life stitched together. I turned to the back pocket of the planner where I kept receipts, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. A folded bank statement slipped out, landing on the table. My eyes followed the lines automatically, but the numbers hit me differently this morning. Transfers to Nathan. Transfers labeled temporary loan. Transfers with no label at all, just amounts deducted, unquestioned. It wasn't the money that chilled me. It was the ease with which he had grown to expect it, as if my support were a natural resource that would never run dry. A quiet steadiness settled in my chest then, not anger, not revenge, clarity. A clarity I hadn't had in years. I reached for the phone and dialed the bank before I could talk myself out of it. "Good morning, this is Valley Federal," a young man answered. How can I help you today? My name is Margaret Allison, I said. I'd like to review my recurring transfers and scheduled payments. There was a pause, the sound of keys clicking. Of course, Mrs. Allison. I see several monthly transfers. Are you referring to the 3 for utilities, or… No, I interrupted softly. The ones going to my son. Another pause. Longer this time. Ah, yes. I see quite a few? List them, I said. He cleared his throat. There's a bi-weekly transfer of $800, a monthly payment of $300 for his insurance, another for his credit line, and… That's enough, I said quietly. I'd like to cancel all of them, effective immediately. Cancel all? His voice wavered. Mrs. Allison, these have been active for several years. Are you sure? I'm sure. I could almost feel him straightening in his chair. Understood. I will process the cancellations now. But I must inform you, Mrs. Allison, that some of the transfers may already be in the authorization stage. That's fine. If there are any penalties, that's fine as well. He typed for a while. All right. Everything has been suspended. You'll receive confirmation emails shortly. I thanked him and hung up. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I half expected trembling or guilt, or the familiar ache of wanting to explain myself, justify myself. But there was nothing. Just a quiet sense of rightness. I looked around the kitchen, noticing how still it was, how peaceful. I realized then that I had lived so long inside worry. Worry for Nathan's finances, his deadlines, his stress, his moods, that I'd forgotten what my own peace felt like. Now, sitting at the table with the morning light spreading across the floor, I felt something close to it. The next decision came just as naturally. I opened the drawer where I kept personal documents, insurance papers, Walter's old pension forms, my deed, the envelope holding my will. I hadn't looked at it in years. It still listed Nathan as the primary beneficiary. I unfolded the pages slowly, smoothing the creases with my palm. Walter and I had written it together when Nathan was 21, full of promise and kindness. We thought we were ensuring his future. But now, holding the brittle paper, I understood something painful but necessary. My husband had trusted a son who no longer existed. I folded the will back up and placed it on the table. Then I reached for the phone again. The lawyer's receptionist answered cheerfully. Good morning, Allison and Pierce. Good morning, I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, composed. I'd like to schedule an appointment to update my will and review a power of attorney document. When would you like to come in, Mrs. Allison? As soon as possible. After we set the time, I placed the phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the finality of my choices wash over me. There was no anger in me, just a strange, cleansing stillness. Outside the window, the maple tree stirred in the wind, its branches swaying like an old friend nodding in approval. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone bracing for the next demand, the next careless request, the next small humiliation disguised as normal. I felt like a woman reclaiming her life. The confirmation emails from the bank arrived just after noon. I saw the screen light up on the kitchen counter, each notification a small, decisive knock echoing through the quiet house. Transfer canceled. Authorization suspended. Recurring payment removed. For years, those very transactions had flowed out of my account like a quiet river, unnoticed until the riverbed had begun to hollow beneath my feet. Now, the flow had stopped. The silence that followed felt like oxygen. I made myself a sandwich, the first proper meal I'd had since yesterday, and ate it, standing by the sink. The morning's decisions had taken something out of me. not because they were difficult, but because they were new. Strength, when you haven't used it in a long time, makes the muscles tremble a little. I took my coat from the closet. It was the tan wool one I'd bought 10 years ago, the kind of coat meant to last a lifetime, warm but not heavy. Walter always liked me in it. He used to say I looked distinguished, though at the time I thought he was just flattering me. Now, slipping it on, I felt something close to dignity wrap around my shoulders. I needed to walk. Not far, just enough to let the cold air clear the remnants of Nathan's voice from my thoughts. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet only weekday afternoons can produce. A few retirees tending their gardens, a delivery truck idling by the curb, a mother pushing a stroller bundled like winter cargo. I nodded to the usual faces, people who'd seen me year after year, carrying groceries, trimming hedges, waving politely from across the street. But today, for the first time, I felt separate from them. Not distant, simply more aware of myself, as though stepping out of a long fog and seeing the world with clean eyes. I ended up at the park near the library where I used to work. Children played on the swings, their laughter bright and weightless, reminding me of afternoons I'd spent here with Nathan when he was little. Back when his small hand fit easily into mine, and he looked up at me as if I were the sun itself. I sat on the bench, the one beneath the old elm tree. Its bark had deepened in ridges over the years, much like the lines in my own face, shaped by time rather than trouble. The crisp breeze brushed against me, carrying faint traces of pine and distant chimney smoke. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the early years, not with sadness, but with honesty. Nathan had once been tender, thoughtful even. He used to bring me flowers picked from the neighbor's yard, saying they needed to be appreciated. He'd read library books aloud to me, stumbling over words but refusing help. I had believed those seeds of gentleness would grow into something steady in him. But life has its own way of shaping a person, and sometimes those seeds fall on thinner soil than we hope. A robin landed near my feet, hopping twice before flying off. I watched it go and found myself thinking of something Walter once told me during our final months together. We were sitting in the backyard, the autumn wind turning his breath into mist. "Margaret," he'd said, "you carry too much. One day it's going to crush you if you don't learn to put something down." At the time, I'd brushed it off, insisting that motherhood was simply a matter of strength, that loving someone meant holding on, even when they pulled away, even when their weight doubled. But now, with years and loss stretched between then and now, I understood what he meant. There comes a point when holding on is simply another way of hurting yourself. I took a long, slow breath, feeling the cool air settle inside my lungs. When I returned home, the house no longer felt oppressive. If anything, it felt expectant, as though the walls themselves sensed a shift. I set my coat on the rack and checked the clock. Still an hour before I needed to leave for the lawyer's appointment. My phone vibrated. Nathan again. I let it ring. Then I turned the phone so the screen faced down. A small act, but strangely powerful. In the quiet, I reviewed documents, the deed to the house, my insurance, my savings accounts. I ran my finger along the edges of the papers, feeling the weight of every signature I'd ever given for Nathan's sake. Car repairs, tuition he never finished, a business loan he called a sure thing, which dissolved within 6 months. Each decision made with the hope that money could fill the gap between us, or at least keep it from widening. But today, instead of feeling foolish, I felt free. I had loved the best way I knew how, with effort, with sacrifice, with constancy. If he had misused my generosity, that was his failing, not mine. At 3 o'clock, I gathered the papers into a neat folder and placed it into my tote bag. The sunlight through the window had shifted to a softer angle, casting long stripes across the floor. I paused for a moment, letting that light settle on my face. A burden, he had called me. But as I stepped out of the house, locking the door behind me, I felt lighter than I had in decades. He didn't know it yet. Perhaps he never would. But something inside me had finally woken up. The lawyer's office sat in a quiet brick building near the courthouse, a place where time seemed to move a little slower, as if even the air encouraged reflection. I'd been here only once before, years ago, when Walter and I first drafted our will. Back then, the future felt like something we could plan neatly, lay out logically, like books on a shelf. What a tender illusion that was. Inside, the receptionist recognized my name and gave me a gentle smile, the kind reserved for people old enough to deserve respect, even if the world rarely grants it. "Mrs. Allison, Mr. Whitmore will be right with you." I thanked her and sat on a leather chair in the waiting area. My folder lay on my lap, the documents inside resting like small, decisive stones. I traced the edges with my fingertips. The deed, the old will, Walter's pension statement. The power of attorney Nathan had insisted I sign 5 years ago, just to make things easier. I hadn't questioned it then. Questioning my son had felt disloyal. The door opened. "Margaret," Mr. Whitmore said, leaning on the frame. "Come in." His office smelled faintly of paper and cedar. He motioned for me to sit, then settled behind his desk with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had spent decades witnessing the intimate unraveling of other people's lives. "What can I help you with today?" he asked. I placed the folder on his desk and opened it. "I need to make some changes." He glanced at the papers, then at me. His eyes softened. "Is everything all right?" It was a simple question, but the kind that could knock the breath from a person if answered honestly. Still, I found no tremor in my voice. "I need to revoke the power of attorney granted to my son," I said, "and update my will. He is no longer the person my husband and I believed he would be." Mr. Whitmore didn't pry, though his expression held understanding. Older men often do. They've seen the fractures families try so hard to hide. "Of course," he said. "We can take care of all that." He reviewed the documents quietly, occasionally making notes. I watched his pen move across the page, the ink spreading smoothly, forming the first lines of a future that belonged to me alone. "For the new will," he asked gently, "who would you like to name as your beneficiary?" The answer came without hesitation. "My granddaughter, Lily." Lily, who showed up without asking. Lily, who brought flowers from her garden because she knew I loved the way they brightened the kitchen. Lily, who saw me not as an obligation, but as a person. He nodded. "A trust may also be appropriate, given your assets. It would protect everything from misuse." "Let's do that." He explained the structure. An irrevocable trust, controlled by a neutral trustee, ensuring that no one, not even Nathan, could demand, pressure, or manipulate access. It felt like placing armor around the last part of my life that still belonged to me. When he finished outlining everything, he looked up. "These are significant changes. Are you sure this is what you want?" I folded my hands in my lap. They didn't shake. For the first time in a long time, yes. "I'm sure." He gave a small, approving nod, the kind a doctor might give a patient choosing the hard but healing path. "All right, I'll prepare the documents. You'll sign them at our next appointment." As I stood to leave, he added softly, "You're doing the right thing, Margaret. Protecting your dignity is never a selfish act." Outside, the late afternoon light had turned golden, brushing the sidewalk with a warmth that didn't quite reach the air. I breathed in deeply, letting the coolness fill my lungs. My steps toward the car felt steadier than they had that morning. Each one carried a faint echo of something I'd almost forgotten. The knowledge that my life still had boundaries I had the right to defend. Driving home, the maple tree by my window was the first thing I saw. Its branches lifted slightly by the wind, as if greeting me. Something had shifted. Not in the world, but in me. That evening, the house felt unusually quiet, as if it were holding its breath right alongside me. I had never been afraid of silence. It had filled my life for many years after Walter passed. But tonight, it felt different. Not heavy, not painful, just watchful. As though the walls themselves were waiting to see whether I would take back my decisions or stand firm. I set my tote bag down by the sofa and eased myself into Walter's old armchair. My shoulders ached from the day. Not from strain, but from the unfamiliar weight of acting entirely for myself. It's surprising how heavy self-respect feels at first when you've gone years without lifting it. The phone lay on the coffee table, screen dark and still. I didn't touch it. For a long time, I simply sat there, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog down the street, the soft tapping of branches against the window. Sounds I'd heard 1,000 times but never really noticed until now. Then the buzzing began. A single vibration, then another, then several in quick succession. The screen lit up, casting a pale glow across the room. Nathan. I didn't need to open the messages to know their tone. I could almost hear the rhythm of them. First the tentative apology, then the practiced explanation, then the subtle accusation disguised as concern. I'd lived long enough to recognize the shape of a pattern. I turned the phone face down. But a few minutes later, it buzzed again. And again. Like a stubborn reminder of a tether I had spent the entire day cutting. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and reminded myself, not answering was allowed. Silence, too, was a boundary. By the time the phone stopped vibrating, twilight had deepened outside. The last of the pink light stretched along the horizon, pulling shadows across the room. I liked the way the colors softened the edges of the furniture. Everything looked a little gentler in the dimming light. Even the memories. I leaned my head back and let myself drift to the thought that had hovered at the edges of my mind all day. What do I owe my son now? Not in the moral sense. Guilt had worn itself out long ago. But in the practical one. If I no longer held his financial burdens, if I no longer played the role he depended on, what place did he imagine for me in his life? I suspected the answer, a decorative one. A holiday chair to fill, a soft voice to soothe, a wallet to open when he stumbled. But I was no longer willing to be anything that existed only on his terms. The phone vibrated once more, this time long enough to signal a voicemail. Then silence settled again. I don't know how much time passed before I heard the soft scrape of something at my front porch. A car door closing. Footsteps on the wooden steps. The familiar rhythm of someone who knew exactly how the boards creaked. For a moment, my heart tightened, not with fear, but with the instinct of a mother bracing for impact. A knock followed, firm, impatient. Then another. I didn't rise right away. I let the sound echo through the hallway, let it roll over me like cold water. When I finally stood, I did so slowly, feeling the steadiness beneath my feet. This time, I wasn't rushing toward an apology I didn't owe. At the door, I paused, resting my hand on the frame. The porch light cast a yellow glow across the frosted glass. Nathan's silhouette stood on the other side, shoulders rigid, head tilted forward, the stance of a man accustomed to being heard the moment he demanded it. I breathed in deeply before opening the door. He didn't greet me. He didn't even try to soften his expression. "Mom," he said, his voice clipped. "I've been calling all day." "I know." "You didn't answer." "No," I said calmly. "I didn't." He blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of my reply. He wasn't used to me being direct. He wasn't used to me withholding explanations. "I need to talk to you," he said, stepping slightly forward as if prepared to cross the threshold without invitation. I didn't move. "Then talk," I said. "But stay outside. I'm not ready to host company tonight." His jaw tightened, irritation flaring behind his eyes. But for once, he didn't push. Maybe it was the shift in my tone, the absence of pleading, of softness, of guilt. I think he heard something new in my voice, something unfamiliar to him. Respect for myself. He exhaled sharply. "Mom, what is going on? I got notifications from the bank. All the transfers were stopped. All of them. Why would you do that without talking to me?" The question wasn't surprising. What surprised me was how little it pierced. "I didn't need your permission to make decisions about my own money," I said gently. He stared at me, stunned into silence. The sky behind him darkened, turning the edges of his figure into shadow. For the first time in our lives, I saw not the boy I raised, not the man I hoped he'd become, but the person he was in this moment. Someone forced to face the consequences of years he had taken for granted. And I felt no guilt. Only a steady, quiet certainty that this conversation was the beginning of something long overdue. Nathan stood on the porch as if the cold couldn't touch him, though the night air had sharpened enough to sting my cheeks. He kept shifting his weight, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, a habit he'd developed in childhood whenever he felt cornered. Back then, I would bend down, smooth his hair, tell him everything would be all right. Tonight, I simply watched. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice as if I were the unreasonable one, "you can't just cut everything off without warning. I rely on those transfers." I folded my arms loosely, not in defense, but in steadiness. "That's the problem, Nathan. You rely on them." "They're temporary," he insisted. "You know that." Temporary, a word he had used for years, stretched until it no longer resembled anything true. Before I could respond, headlights swept across the street. A small car pulled up and parked just behind Nathan's. The door opened, and a familiar slender figure got out. "Grandma?" The voice was soft, surprised. "I saw Dad's car. Is everything okay?" "Lily." She walked toward us, her long scarf wrapped twice around her neck, hair pulled up in the messy knot she always wore when studying. 19 years old, thoughtful as a spring morning, brave without trying to be. Nathan stiffened. "Lily, go home. This is between me and your grandmother." She ignored him completely and stepped onto the porch, placing herself beside me as naturally as if she'd always belonged there. Her eyes searched my face, worried, gentle. Did something happen? I could have lied. I almost did. Years of habit make denial the easiest path. But I saw the concern in her expression, and something inside me softened. Not into weakness, but into honesty. "Your father and I are having a conversation we should have had a long time ago," I said quietly. Nathan exhaled sharply. "Unbelievable. Mom, You're making this bigger than it is. I said something I didn't mean. Can't we just move past it? Lily's eyebrows knit together. What did you say? He shot her a warning look. This is none of your business. That's not how family works, Dad, she said calmly. Not when you hurt someone. Her composure unsettled him. She had Walter's steadiness, not mine. Well, he snapped, since you seem to think you're a part of this, fine. I accidentally left Mom on speaker this morning, and she heard something out of context. I didn't speak. I let him choose his version. He cleared his throat. I said she was difficult sometimes, that's all. And now she's blowing it way out of proportion. Lily turned to me. Is that what you heard? I held her gaze. No, I said. It isn't. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mom? You called me a burden, I said, still calm. You said I was exhausting, that I always needed something. Lily inhaled sharply. Nathan's face flushed. From anger or shame, I couldn't tell. That was private, he muttered. You weren't supposed to hear it. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it revealed everything at once. And that, I said softly, is exactly the point. Silence settled on the porch. Nathan folded his arms, mirroring my stance, but with none of the ease. Look, Mom, I apologized. What more do you want? I want you to understand, I said. I am not here to be used, not financially, not emotionally, not as an easy place to unload your frustrations. Lily stepped closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine in quiet solidarity. Nathan noticed. His eyes narrowed. So she knows now? He asked, voice rising. You told her? Of course you did. Great. Wonderful. One more person who thinks I'm the villain. No one said that, I replied. But your actions have consequences. He groaned, pressing his palms to his forehead. Mom, please. I have enough on my plate. Work is a mess. Bills are piling up. And yet, I interrupted gently, you found time to call me a burden in front of your boss. He froze, truly froze. His chest rose and fell in a shallow breath. You heard that part. I heard everything. For a moment, his bravado slipped. Fear flickered in his eyes, not fear of losing me, but of losing what I provided. Lily looked at him then, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it made him shift uncomfortably. Dad, she said quietly, Grandma deserves better. He shook his head, stepping back. I can't deal with this right now. Then you'll have to deal with it later, I replied. But things won't go back to how they were. He stared at me for several long seconds, waiting for me to soften, to rescind my words, to step forward and rescue him from the discomfort I'd finally placed in his path. I didn't move. At last, he let out a frustrated exhale, turned, and walked down the steps toward his car. But Lily stayed beside me. Only when the engine faded into the distance did she finally speak. Grandma, I'm so proud of you. Her voice trembled, not from sadness, but from relief. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until it settled gently into the quiet space Nathan had left behind. After Nathan's car disappeared down the street, the porch grew quiet again, the evening settling around us like a soft shawl. Lily stayed beside me, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, her breath faintly visible in the cooling air. I could feel her watching me, not with pity, but with a kind of worried tenderness that made my throat tighten. Do you want me to come inside for a bit? She asked. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I needed. Company, or simply not to be alone with the echo of Nathan's frustration still hanging in the air. Inside, the house felt warmer. Lily took off her coat and draped it over a chair in that gentle way she did everything. She moved through my kitchen like she'd grown up in it, pulling cups from the cabinet, filling the kettle without asking. A small act, but I felt it deeply. Care, freely given. "Grandma," she said after a moment, "I didn't know Dad talked like that. Not about you." I sat at the table, fingers resting on the wood grain worn smoother by decades of use. He didn't always, but somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me. Not really me, just what I could do. Lily frowned, her brow tightening. "He's wrong. You know that, right? Nothing about you is a burden." Her voice carried a steadiness that reminded me of Walter. That same grounded certainty, as if truth were something you didn't have to force. Only speak. "I'm beginning to understand that," I said. She placed a cup of tea before me. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep into my fingers. "Dad's stressed," she said quietly. "He's been having problems at work for months. He doesn't talk about it, but I hear things. Deadlines missed, numbers not adding up. He's trying to impress that new supervisor." I felt a small shift inside me. Not compassion for Nathan exactly, but recognition. Pressure can twist a person, but only along the cracks already there. "Even so," Lily continued softly, "that doesn't give him the right to talk about you like that." I met her eyes. People reveal themselves under pressure. He did. She bit her lip, thinking, "What will you do now?" I looked around my quiet kitchen. The place I'd lived my whole adult life. The place where I'd carried joy and grief and everything in between. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small in it. I didn't feel like someone waiting for a phone call, a request, a reminder of usefulness. "I'll start living on my terms," I said simply. "And Nathan will have to learn that my boundaries are not negotiable." Lily nodded slowly, as if committing that truth to memory. After a moment, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I'm here," she said, "for whatever comes next." It struck me then how rare it is to be loved without requirement. Her loyalty wasn't born of obligation or debt. She didn't want anything from me but my well-being. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "You have no idea what it means to hear that." She smiled, a soft, earnest smile that warmed the room more than the tea ever could. Later, when she left for the night, the house felt quieter, but not empty. Instead, it felt like a space I had reclaimed, a home that belonged to me again. The phone remained on the table, face down, its silence no longer a threat. For the first time in many years, I slept without waiting for someone to need me. The next few days unfolded with an odd, steady quiet. I kept waiting for the familiar tug of guilt to return, the old instinct to smooth things over, to reach out, to apologize for causing discomfort, even when I'd been the one wounded. But it didn't come. Not this time. Instead, there was only a gentle sense of space around me, as if I'd opened a window in my own life and let stale air escape. Nathan didn't call that first morning, nor the next. By the third day, I knew the silence wasn't accidental. He was gathering himself, preparing an approach, one that would sound reasonable, measured, coded in the sort of concern that hides frustration. I could almost predict the script, but what I didn't predict was the call I received instead. It came just after 11, a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a man cleared his throat on the other end. "Mrs. Allison, this is Mark Delaney. I'm Nathan's supervisor." The voice from the car, the witness to everything. I sat down slowly. "Yes, I remember." He hesitated. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I just wanted to check on you." That morning, well, I wasn't sure you meant to be on the line. A surprising warmth rose in my chest, not from gratitude, but from the simple courtesy of being acknowledged as a person rather than as an inconvenience. I was on the line, I said, and I heard what I heard. He exhaled, the sound full of discomfort. I wanted to apologize for that. It wasn't my place to listen. The fault wasn't yours. He paused again. Nathan's been out of sorts at work. He's under review for a couple of errors in recent reports. He told me he's dealing with family stress. He cleared his throat. I wanted to be sure you weren't being taken advantage of. The bluntness of the question startled me more than anything Nathan had said. I answered honestly. I have allowed more than I should, but that's changing now. Another pause, this one softer. Good, he said. You deserve better than the way he spoke that morning. I thanked him quietly and ended the call. For several minutes I remained seated, staring at the teacup cooling between my palms. Something about the conversation left me unsettled, not in a painful way, but in a revealing one. Nathan hadn't only exposed his contempt to me, he'd exposed it to the one person in his professional life he needed to impress. And instead of concern for what his words had done to me, he'd framed the aftermath as his burden. A familiar sadness stirred, but it didn't take hold. It merely passed through me, like a visitor no longer welcome to stay. By evening, the silence I'd grown accustomed to broke with the inevitable. A text, then another, then a third. Mom, we need to talk. Please answer. I'm coming by tomorrow. No apology. No acknowledgement of anything he'd done. Just intent, directive, expectation. The old language. I placed the phone on the counter and let the messages sit there. Tomorrow would come. Nathan would come. And whatever he arrived with, anger, excuses, desperation, I would meet it differently than before. Not as someone shrinking into the role he'd given me, but as the woman I had rediscovered these past days, quiet, steady, unwilling to be erased. Nathan arrived earlier than I expected, just after 9 a.m. I saw his car pull up from my kitchen window, the engine barely cooling before he stepped out, shoulders tense, jaw set. There was urgency in his movements, but not the kind born of concern. This was the urgency of a man feeling something slip from his grip. I didn't rush to open the door. I finished drying my hands, folded the towel neatly, and walked to the entryway with the slow, steady pace of someone who'd decided she would not be hurried anymore. He knocked twice, sharp and impatient. When I opened the door, I didn't invite him in. Mom, he said, breathless, though he hadn't climbed a single stair. We need to clear the air. I'm listening, I replied, staying framed in the doorway. He frowned. Can I come inside? Not today. The refusal startled him. I saw it flicker across his features before he tried to mask it with irritation. Fine, he said. We'll talk here. He rubbed the back of his neck, searching for the right opening. Look, I know you're upset, obviously, but cutting off the transfers? Canceling everything without a conversation? That's extreme. It's overdue, I corrected. He blew out a breath. Mom, you know what I meant the other day. I was stressed. My boss was in the car. I just said something stupid. You said something true, I said softly. True to how you see me. His mouth tightened. That's not fair. It's honest. He looked away then, glancing toward the street, as if hoping the argument would drift somewhere else. It didn't. You didn't have to embarrass me at work, he muttered. Delaney pulled me aside yesterday. He said he called you. He did. You talked to him? Why would you? He reached out to be sure I wasn't being taken advantage of, I said. He showed more concern than you have in years. That struck him hard. I saw the flinch he couldn't hide. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "my job is on the line. I can't have people thinking I'm irresponsible." I held his gaze. "Then perhaps you should start behaving responsibly." His nostrils flared. A small detail, but I'd known him long enough to recognize the moment anger began replacing reason. "This isn't you," he said. "You don't make decisions like this. You don't cut people off." "You're right," I said quietly. "I didn't. For a long time, I didn't. I let myself be whatever you needed, even when what you needed hurt me." He blinked, thrown by the calm in my tone. "I've supported you for decades," I continued. "Not because I had to, but because I loved you. I still do. But love cannot survive on one side forever." He shook his head, frustrated. "So what? You're just done now? After everything I've carried?" "Everything you've carried?" I repeated gently. "Nathan, most of what you carried, I handed you. Most of what you struggled with, I paid for. And most of the time, you never even said thank you." His lips parted, but no sound came out. For a long moment, we just stood there, the morning light stretching across the porch, illuminating truths neither of us had said aloud before. "I'm not punishing you," I said finally. "I'm protecting myself. And I'm choosing a different way to live. One where my worth isn't measured in what I give up." He swallowed hard, emotion flashing across his face. Frustration, disbelief, fear, but not remorse. Not yet. "So that's it," he whispered. "You're choosing this distance?" "I'm choosing dignity," I said. "You're welcome to meet me there, if you're willing to." He didn't respond. Not a word. He stepped back slowly, as if the porch itself had become unfamiliar ground. "Mom," he began, but the rest never came. He turned, walked to his car, and drove away without looking back. I closed the door gently, not as an ending, but as a boundary. And for the first time in many years, closing a door didn't feel like loss. It felt like clarity. The morning after Nathan left my porch, I woke with an unfamiliar feeling. Not ease, not joy, but a kind of groundedness. As if my feet were finally planted firmly in my own life rather than in the space his needs carved out for me. The house was quiet, sunlight just beginning to stretch across the bedroom floor. For once, I didn't wake with the reflex to check my phone or the lingering dread of what favor might be asked next. I brewed tea and carried it to the dining table, letting the steam warm my face. Outside, the maple tree shifted in the wind, leaves brushing together with that soft sound I'd always mistaken for loneliness. Today, it felt like company. Midway through my tea, the phone buzzed. A single vibration. Not frantic, not insistent. "Nathan." I didn't pick up. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, the message notification appeared, but I didn't press play. My world didn't need to rearrange itself around his urgency anymore. Instead, I gathered the documents from yesterday's meeting and laid them neatly on the table. They no longer felt like heavy choices, just steps forward. Necessary steps. My hands moved with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself the worst of it was behind me. But life rarely grants clean lines. It moves in circles and echoes. At 1:00, a firm knock sounded at the front door. Not hurried, not angry, just present. When I opened it, Nathan stood there, neither defensive nor contrite, just tired. A kind of worn-out heaviness clung to him, as if he'd slept badly and carried the weight of it in his shoulders. "Mom," he said quietly, "can we talk? Really talk this time?" I considered him for a long moment, then nodded and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. I still wasn't ready to let him inside my space. Boundaries aren't built in single moments. They're reinforced one decision at a time. He didn't argue. That alone was surprising. "I listened to your voicemail," he began. "I know it didn't seem like it yesterday, but I am trying to understand." Trying, not succeeding, but trying. "What is it you think you understand?" I asked. He rubbed his eyes. "That I've been relying on you too much. That I've taken advantage. I know it looks that way." "It doesn't just look that way," I said gently. "It is that way." He winced, but he didn't fight it. "I keep telling myself I'm helping you when I keep things from you," he said. "That I'm protecting you from stress. But maybe I've just been avoiding responsibility and expecting you to pick up the slack." It surprised me. Not because it was profound, but because it was honest. I didn't speak. I let him continue, let him sit in the truth he was only beginning to face. "I know I hurt you," he said softly, "and I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." A small wind moved between us, lifting a curl of hair from my forehead. "I can't undo the things I said," he went on. "And I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I don't want this distance. I don't want to lose you." There it was. The fear behind his urgency. Real, unpolished, unguarded. "Nathan," I said, "you're not losing me. You're losing access to the parts of me you misused." He looked up sharply, eyes rimmed in something like shame. "I'm your mother," I continued. "That doesn't end. But what does end is the expectation that I will carry you at the cost of myself. I won't return to that." He swallowed. "I don't know how to fix this." "You start," I said, "by listening. Truly listening. Without dismissing, without minimizing, without turning everything into what you feel." He nodded slowly, hesitant, but present. "I can try," he said. "Trying is a beginning," I replied. "But the rest is on you, not me." For the first time in years, he didn't argue. He simply lowered his gaze and breathed, as if absorbing the weight of what I'd said. We stood there for a moment, not reconciled, not healed, but honest. And sometimes, honesty is the first doorway to change. Nathan didn't call for 2 days after that conversation on the porch. Not out of anger. I could sense that in the silence. It was the pause of a man trying to rearrange the pieces of his life and unsure where to place the largest one, his own mother's boundaries. I didn't wait for him, didn't hover near the phone the way I once would have. I cooked simple meals, tidied the house, reread an old mystery novel. I moved through my days as if I were stepping back into a life I'd forgotten belonged to me. On the third evening, just as I was settling into my armchair with a blanket across my knees, I heard a hesitant knock at the door. Not the sharp, demanding knock Nathan used when he felt entitled to my time. This one was softer, almost asking permission just to exist. When I opened the door, he stood with his hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. A boy again, somewhere beneath the man. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I come in this time?" I hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Allowing him inside wasn't surrender. It was intention. My choice, on my terms. He stepped in slowly, glancing around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. When you treat someone as a fixture in your life, you stop seeing the life around them. "I brought something," he said, lifting a paper bag. "It's just soup. I didn't know if you'd eaten." A small offering. Awkward, but sincere. I thanked him and set it on the counter. He sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything. About what you said." I waited. He needed space to find his way through the truth, not a map handed to him. I used to think, he said slowly, that taking help from you was just part of how families work. You know, you help with what you can. But somewhere along the line, I stopped noticing the difference between help and dependence. He lifted his gaze. There was no anger there now, only bewilderment at the person he'd allowed himself to become. I don't know when it happened, he said, but I started assuming you'd always say yes, that you'd always be there. I didn't think about how that must feel for you. I didn't think about you at all. His honesty washed over me like a quiet tide, not erasing the past, but smoothing its harshest edges. You hurt me, I said softly, deeply. I know. His voice cracked. And I am sorry, Mom, truly. Not because I'm losing money or help or anything like that, but because I didn't see you. I didn't act like you mattered. I let the words settle. Genuine remorse has a different texture. Thinner, quieter. His felt real. I can't promise I'll get everything right, he added, but I want to try. I want to do better. I want you in my life. Not because I need you, but because I love you. The air between us felt fragile, like a sheet of thin glass. You're taking the first steps, I said. That's all I ask. But understand, Nathan, I won't go back to the way things were. I won't erase myself to keep peace. He nodded quickly. I don't want that. And I don't want to be that man anymore. A long silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a space we hadn't allowed ourselves in years, a space where truth could breathe. Finally, he stood. I should go. I don't want to overwhelm you. You didn't, I said. It's enough for tonight. At the door he paused, one hand on the frame. Mom? Thank you for not shutting me out. I shook my head gently. No, Nathan. I'm inviting you in, differently. That's not the same as letting you walk over me. He swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped into the night. When I closed the door, I didn't lean against it for support the way I once might have. I simply stood there, feeling the stillness settle into me like something earned. We weren't healed. We weren't fixed. But we were finally, blessedly, honest. The next morning, I moved through the house with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. Not joy. No. Joy is something brighter, louder. This was something softer, like finally being able to exhale after holding my breath far too long. I made oatmeal, sliced a pear, opened the curtains. The maple tree outside glittered with dew, catching sunlight the way memory catches truth. Gently, but persistently. Nathan's visit lingered in my mind, not as a wound reopening, but as a wound finally beginning to close. His apology hadn't erased anything. Apologies rarely do, yet it had landed somewhere deeper than I expected. For the first time, he'd spoken not from entitlement or desperation, but from reflection, a man facing his own failings. That, at least, deserved room to breathe. Still, I kept my pace steady and slow. Healing is not a race, and hard-earned boundaries don't dissolve overnight. Around noon, I stepped outside to water the potted herbs on the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine from somewhere up the street. As I bent to check the soil, a soft hum drifted toward me. A familiar car, small, gentle in sound. When I looked up, Lily was already climbing out, waving. I brought you something, she called, holding a grocery bag against her hip. She joined me on the porch, eyes bright, cheeks flushed from the cold. Chamomile tea, the good kind, and honey from that little market you like. I smiled. You spoil me. No, she said simply. I just see you. The words struck deeper than she knew. We went inside, and she unpacked the bag in that easy rhythm she seemed born with. She filled the kettle, sliced a lemon, set 2 cups on the table. There was no hurry in her movements, no tension, just presence. "Dad told me he talked to you," she said after a moment, not looking up from the honey jar she was opening. "He did," I said. She nodded, thoughtful. "He's been quiet since. Not angry. Just thinking. I think he's scared, Grandma. Not of you, of himself. Of realizing things he didn't want to admit." I sat with that for a moment. Fear can be a powerful teacher, if one is willing to learn. "I don't expect him to change overnight," I said. "I know," she replied. "But he heard you. Really heard you. That's new." When the tea was ready, she poured mine first, the way Walter used to. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, letting the steam soften the edges of the morning. "You seem stronger," Lily said suddenly, studying me with those perceptive eyes. "I feel stronger," I admitted. "Not because Nathan apologized, because I finally stopped apologizing for myself." She smiled, pride warming her face. "You deserve that." We talked for a while, about her classes, her roommates, the stray cat wandering around her dorm building. Simple things, ordinary things. But beneath them was a quiet current of something profound, connection, unforced and mutual. After she left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt supported, as if her presence had reinforced the walls from within. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Nathan. "Thank you for last night. I'm working on things. I'll call when I have something real to say." It was small. It was imperfect. It was enough. I put the phone down gently, not with the trembling hope of the past, but with a calm acceptance of the present. Life wasn't repaired, but it was mending. And I felt, for the first time in a long while, entirely aligned with myself. The last days of that week passed with a kind of steadiness that felt almost foreign to me. Not because nothing happened, but because I wasn't pulled in every direction anymore. My life, for the first time in many years, moved at my pace. The mornings were still slow, the evenings still quiet. But now the quiet didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like room. On Friday, sunlight filled the kitchen so warmly that the floor looked almost golden. I stood by the counter, slicing an apple for breakfast, when I realized something so simple it made me pause. I no longer dreaded the sound of my own thoughts. The phone rang once, a gentle ring. Nathan's name appeared on the screen, not demanding, not insistent, just there. I let it ring twice more before I answered. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice wasn't tense this time. It carried the soft exhaustion of someone trying to walk a new path without knowing if he's placing his feet correctly. "Hello, Nathan." "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "And I know thinking isn't enough, but I wanted to tell you what I figured out." I sat down at the table, letting the chair creak beneath me. "All right." "Go on?" There was a pause. Not defensive, not rehearsed. Just a man searching for words he'd never had to say before. "I hurt you because it was easy," he said quietly. "Because you were always there, no matter how careless I was. I never asked myself what it cost you to be that patient. I just assumed you would always absorb it." The honesty startled me. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was unguarded. "I don't want to be that man anymore," he continued. "I'm getting help. I talked to someone at work about the stress and the mistakes I've made. I'm trying to take responsibility for more than just the job, for how I've treated you." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. They didn't erase anything. They weren't meant to. But they reached a part of me that had waited years to be acknowledged. "I'm glad you're doing that," I said. "I know I don't deserve your trust back right away," he said. "But someday, maybe I can earn a little of it." Outside, the wind brushed against the windows, a quiet rustle like an old friend clearing its throat. "You can begin by keeping your word," I said. "By seeing me as a person, not a solution." "I will," he said quickly. "I promise." Promises, I knew, were fragile. But beginnings rarely come in perfect form. They come in earnestness, in effort, in the space between what we were and what we hoped to be. When we ended the call, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was steadier, a calm acceptance that life doesn't always offer clean victories. Sometimes it gives you a shift, a turning, a door half open instead of slammed shut. In the afternoon, Lily stopped by with a bouquet of late-season flowers. She placed them on the table and looked at me with that bright, searching gaze of hers. "You look peaceful," she said. "I feel peaceful," I answered. We sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, sipping chamomile tea as the sky softened toward evening. The maple tree stood tall, its branches moving gently, the same way Walter used to nod when something finally made sense to him. "Grandma?" Lily asked after a quiet stretch. "Are you proud of yourself?" I smiled at the horizon. "Yes," I said. "I am." Not loudly, not triumphantly, but truthfully. Because I had chosen myself without abandoning love. I had drawn a line without building a wall. I had reclaimed my voice, not to shout, but to speak clearly again. As the last of the light faded, I heard myself say something I'd never allowed before. "I'm not afraid of the years ahead." Lily squeezed my hand. "You shouldn't be." And I wasn't. For the first time in a long time, the road ahead looked like something I could walk. Slowly, steadily, with dignity intact. And if you're reading this, if any part of my quiet fight feels familiar to you, then hear me gently. Choose yourself. Choose your voice. Choose your dignity. And do it before someone convinces you that you don't have the right.